They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole.
Get
we found.
ready. It's time again to venture down the rabbit hole into the world of cybersecurity. You're plugged into the podcast for security leaders and practitioners with a business sense. Prepare for unique interviews, insights, and practical advice that makes your job just a bit easier. And now, please welcome your guides on this adventure, James Jardine and the White Rabbit, Rafal Loose.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raf, the host with the almost. I'm funny. I tell dad jokes periodically, but only when I'm in my element. That's what my new t-shirt says. It's great. All right, on the show today, we're going to cover a follow-up from the last episode Mr. Tuma and I did that talked a little bit about cyber insurance. And Shawn, welcome back. Tuma?
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's good to have you as always. Man, you're like a repeat offender that's come back for more. You just don't learn. All right. Excellent. And then just to make things slightly less and more complicated, we have another Shawn we just learned he's named after the Sean Connery. So definitely a different lineage than you two. Sorry, man.
Yeah,
less John Wayne and more proper English, whatever that means. Shawn, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Shawn Scranton. I am currently an underwriter of cyber liability for RLI Insurance, but my past, I'd say lineage, covers firewalls, audits for large organizations, banks, government agencies, and then before that, I was a humble network administrator for a few years. So been doing this for about 25 or so years, and love it every minute.
An underwriter for cyber insurance. That makes you exactly the perfect person to talk to, because there are so many suppositions, guesses, myths, legends, and fairy tales around cyber insurance. Not the least of which is probably one Shawn has heard too many times. Can't I just buy cyber insurance and forget about doing security? Let's go ahead and just tell people no right off the bat. No. The answer is no. Bad. No.
But how many times have we heard it at like real legitimate conferences and places where you expect people to understand these things?
Just because you have car insurance doesn't mean you can play demolition derby on the streets. I'm just saying, although people do.
That's a good point.
People do. So, we've got a couple of things that we want to cover. So, two big myths, right? Cyber insurance doesn't pay. Does it? When does it? When does it not? Because we've heard a lot of sort of secondhand myth, or we'll say hearsay, around cyber insurance isn't really paying out. You can buy it, but it's not going to do you any good. You don't really need it. And then there's people that'll tell you that's all they get, and then they let it dictate. What's the reality behind that? Does cyber insurance actually pay out?
It does. And first, before I get started, let me say that I do need to note that what I say are my own opinions and statements.
Disclaimer.
And do not represent our lives.
Let it be known.
Thank you. But from my experience, yes, it does. And I think if you're watching this and you're approaching your renewal or you've applied for insurance, you might see there have been some price increases this year, and I think we're going to talk more about that later. And those price increases are a reaction to the claims that insurers have paid. So I guess I would say if insurance has not been paying, then there really wouldn't be any reason to raise the prices.
Point.
But I think as you'll see, and a lot of it is driven by ransomware. The ransomware that you see in the headlines, it's really impacted, just across the spectrum. Even down to the one person business, all the way up to the large, Fortune 50 enterprises. And so, from an insurance standpoint, Just like your car, if you want to go play demolition derby, that's okay, but your rates are probably going to go up. And so that's kind of the market we're in with
So
cyber.
there was the famous case, and Tuma, I think you and I talked about it, and I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was a company that got breached, and the government later was either, I want to say it was either Mandiant or CrowdStrike. I think it was CrowdStrike that issued that a report that said it was a nation state, and then suddenly it went from we're paying this to we're not paying this because this is an act of terrorism. Or what was the clause, Tuma? Am I right on this?
Oh, it was a real estate policy, I think, or it was a property policy that they were trying to get coverage under. I'm forgetting the name. It was
Mondelez.
Mondelez, yeah.
Mondelez.
Yeah,
Mondelez
and everybody took that and they're like, see, look, cyber insurance doesn't pay when you really need them. And they didn't dig that next step down to say, well, wait, you didn't have a cyber policy. You had property coverage, and of course not.
Interesting.
But it shows you how a narrative gets built on misinformation. I mean, I know none of us can believe that happens.
In this industry,
a narrative can get built on misinformation and then start propagating itself, and people started to believe that.
And that's a good point where, that case, it was a case of a company was attacked or had an incident, and they looked and maybe they didn't have cyber insurance, or maybe they didn't have as comprehensive cyber insurance, and so they looked to see what other policies would cover it, and they looked at their GL, which is general liability. They looked at their property policy and said, okay, let's throw property at it and kind of see if it sticks. And unfortunately, it just shows the need for more comprehensive coverage that a cyber policy is going to bring you. And you'll see now that your other policies that you may have are probably going to exclude cyber.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes sense, right? There's a specialized version or product for that. Why would the others continue to cover it? And that makes entirely perfect sense. Let me ask this. I'm curious. Is there any? Because I've not had to buy it on my own in quite a bit, and I've only advised on some of this, and it's been a while. Is there any stipulation, like you've got, in my homeowner's policy, there's this like act of God, hurricane, that kind of thing, right? Like if the hand of God comes down and smashes my house later, they can be like, listen, you're like you're on your own, buddy. Are there the same amount of terms and conditions and exclusions, and like what do you got to watch? What are the gotchas? Like what do you got to watch out for?
Before you jump to that, I think an important point, Raf, that you're coming to, and by the way, I need to say I'm going to be quiet more here than usual because my greatest value to this was bringing Shawn Scranton to here to talk. That's how much he knows. But part of that whole Mondelez issue was the act of war exclusion
that's right.
that you find in a property policy, but you don't find in a lot of the cyber coverage. And that's where I think that's what really made people start saying, oh my God, if they're going to deny every cyber claim because it's an act of war, then when we attribute it to these nation states, you're killing our coverage.
So I guess that's my question then.
So let's dig in and focus on the act of war piece. What we are seeing now, especially with, I deal more with larger entities. So as I mentioned, Fortune 50, we deal more with Fortune 50. So these are policies for very large companies. What we're seeing for those larger revenue companies is the policies will have they will exclude war. They will exclude, and the language kind of varies a little bit, and that's why you have to read all. You have to read your policy. It will exclude nation state attacks.
Interesting.
It will exclude those kind of things, war, civil unrest, etc. But sometimes, and I would say more usually, they will have what's known as a carve back for something called cyber terrorism, and that is more for your ransomware. And so again, you got to read the policy, but usually they'll have that exclusion. And then they will cover it'll be a carve back, which actually allows you to cover the ransomware piece. Now let's broaden our focus out. As you said, the acts of God, etc. I would call those natural perils, and that's going to be like your floods, your earthquakes, those kind of things. Those things are usually excluded. What there's been some little headbutting as recently are coverages for things like, well, what about loss of the internet? Like your internet goes down. What about that? What about loss of power, brownouts, those kind of things? That will usually be excluded as well. Yeah, and I'm as far as the for smaller revenue, that's where you're going to have to read the policy, because you've got 70 different carriers writing the stuff that I help write, and there's going to be about 60 different policies.
Let me go back and focus on this Act of War thing, because in cyber we have had a spate of nation state sponsored, or if not sponsored, then sort of sanctioned attacks lately. Look at all the companies that got popped in FireEye, SolarWinds, and the like, Microsoft, and down the line, right? All the government entities. Are we saying that those would not be covered?
So let me have another caveat here.
Sound like a lawyer.
Oh God, I'm
exactly. It really depends on your policy, and so take a look at your policy. The person to ask would be your broker or your agent, and talk to them and say, I want this particular item covered, and then they can work to form that policy, just like with your auto insurance. If you want to go play demolition derby, then maybe you can add some coverages. You want to up your premium may change as well, but maybe you want enhanced coverage. Your stereo in your car. Your stereo is very valuable to you. You can add coverage for your stereo.
Okay. So, and the reason I ask is because more and more, there is this need in some of these more documented, more complex scenarios, where some company's going to come out and say, "Hey, we've done the research. This was nation state actor, blah blah blah." Right, APT 95 or Comfy Cozy Bear or Pink Panda or whatever the hell we've named these things.
Sure.
And I guess that's like the dreaded death knell, because if I'm going, all right, I got hacked by, somebody, right, and then I'm covered. But if a big adversary is coming at me, wait, then I'm not covered. And I think the way I'm looking at it is from the perspective of, in a security organization, I'm looking at the risk scale. At the bottom of it are unsophisticated attackers. In the middle are sophisticated attackers with resources. At the top are nation state sponsored. Like the bottom one, my tools and tech should take care of automatically. The middle layer, my MSSP and my SOC and all the other manual should eventually find and minimize the threat of that top one. Like, I'm just going to admit it, nothing I can do. That's where my cyber insurance should be helping. And if the policy is excluded, that seems like a cheap shot.
And I think what we're kind of dancing around here is that there is a gap between sometimes, hopefully sometimes not, but there can be a gap between who purchases the insurance and who is directing the broker to buy the insurance and to affect that coverage, and the people that are actually doing the protecting and have a much better understanding. Your CISOs have a much better understanding of the security posture and where there may be some holes and where those holes should be covered by extra insurance, because what we're talking about here completely is risk management, and your inherent risk is mitigated by whatever controls you have in place, and what is left is residual risk, and you can choose to accept that residual risk, or you can choose to transfer it. And if you're transferring it, that's where the insurance comes in.
And I think an important point here is a lot of people don't understand this, which is why we're having this conversation, because there are companies out there where they're going online looking for some fill in the blank, boom, put in your information, spit out your coverage, which is one end of the spectrum. And then there's what Shawn does, which is get on the phone with these people, go deep into all this, and you've got to know what you need to know how to get the right
Yeah,
solution.
that sounds like it.
And it occurs, the process I just kind of went through, that occurs at these larger organizations where there's very good risk management going on. The CISOs are involved. I think where things start getting a little blurry is when you start getting into smaller organizations.
See,
Where maybe that does not occur, and maybe there's not the expertise to understand these cyber policies.
And the broker that they go to may not
Yes.
understand, and that's
okay.
a big
So this
problem.
is where my spidey sense tingles, and I go, man. As soon as we go down market security, everything about security breaks down as soon as you leave the Fortune 500. Hell, as soon as you leave the Fortune 250, in a lot of cases, almost everything about the way we do security breaks down because my focus in my day job is on the mid market, and that's kind of where my expertise has been anyway for the last 20 some odd years. These companies don't have that mature enterprise risk management to CISO to board grouping, boardroom table kind of relationship. It is literally, in some cases, 3 IT people and 75, developers, whatever, salespeople, operations, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got companies that even if they wanted to, right? I work for arguably a company the size of GE. For 35 some odd thousand people, we had 6, 7 security professionals. Again, 2001, 2002, so a long time ago. But I know those numbers are consistent today, not necessarily there because I don't know, but in other companies of that size. So there's got to be some way to fix this because all the tools, all the vendors, now including cyber insurance, is all geared towards those big ones. And now I'm standing there, I'm the head of risk or a CEO or somebody, right? That's looking at a cyber insurance policy for a company of 4,000 people, 3 locations, globally, 1 outside the U.S. Got some IT people. I've got like 2 or 3 security folks. One of them is a director, had some experience, and I'm going, all right, what do I need? And what you're saying is everybody on the table is sort of going, not quite sure.
So let's take a look at that, and I think what you're describing is the need for that holistic risk management at smaller companies, which is in some cases, it's probably missing, and I've been there too. I used to audit them, so I know.
And I see it too.
One of the things you can do is, once you take care of your internal stuff and figure out, okay, these are where my holes are, and these are where I think I need coverage. And hey, maybe I just want a little extra coverage, which in the cyber world we call that CAT, as in catastrophe. So, maybe the probability of me getting ransomware is real small because I have really good controls, but let's buy some insurance anyway. You can do
says everyone until about 30 seconds after they get ransomware. But we had such good security.
Right. So get your agent or your broker, and maybe in person even, and say, hey, look, can you send us some quotes? Can you send us some policies? You can then take a look at those policies. You can pick the ones that are easier to read, that are written more, I'll say, in English than others, than in my insurance language, right? But also ask for, I call them one-pagers. And usually carriers will provide you with some like marketing slicks that say, this is what we intend to cover with this policy. And then that way you can it's in English. It's in layman's terms, and you can compare it with what your residual risk is and kind of match that up. Now, granted, if stuff happens, it's not going to be the marketing slip that's going to cover you. It's going to be that policy. So you still have to read. You're still responsible.
So hire Shawn or somebody like him.
Well, here's an important
point.
That's
a great point.
that I see a lot is a company has the CEO's brother-in-law who's been doing their insurance as their broker for the last 40 years. And they do a great job at covering the building. And they go out to lunch and they buy drinks and they have a great time. And then the word cyber comes up and it's like, oh yeah, we got that. Yeah, whatever, it's in there. Boom, nothing more. That person is maybe great at insurance in some areas for that company, but that broker or that agent doesn't understand cyber. You need a broker or agent that understands the nuts and bolts of cyber, not just as a passing, oh yeah, we got it, but that can have these detailed, nuanced conversations, or else you're not going to get the insurance you need.
All right. So you mentioned, Sean, that prices were going up. What's driving that? Or do we, because, okay, ransomware. So do we have, fair enough, because we're reading about it literally every day. But we've been one of the things that we complain about in security is that we don't have enough data. We don't have enough data to do models and predictions. I've heard this from a couple of other folks that work for carriers that and underwriters that the first couple of years up until very recently were sort of like, let's put policies out and see what happens. And then we'll sort of true up our business 5 years down the line once we have some loss data coupled with some like what drove it, what did the company look like when it went kablooey, like all that. Are we at a point where we sort of can we feed data into a modeling engine that we have enough is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's okay. I won't say that's okay to do that because it's probably not the way I would do it, but it worked, I think, for a while until about 2016, 2017. And because all we were, not we, but all the industry was covering were data breaches. And data breaches were a little more fortuitous. They were a little more random. Okay. They were a little more targeted. So if you weren't in a targeted industry like retail, if you were in manufacturing, you probably don't need to worry too much about a data breach. But then you have something in 2017 that comes along, Petya, not Petya, WannaCry, that is completely random. It is depending upon if Sally J is going to click on a link and put your entire organization at risk. So your frequency shot up, your severity shot up dramatically, and I don't think the industry was prepared from a rate standpoint to cover that sort of random and I'll say catastrophe, because that's kind of what, when it happens to you, that's what it feels like. It has happened to me as well when I was in internal security ransomware. It's no doubt. It's no joke. It feels like a catastrophe, and that's what they're covering. Going back to your data, I think the larger carriers do have a lot more data than the smaller insurance carriers, and that's an advantage for them, and they can help to price that a little better. But you're right. What you're seeing right now with the rise in rates to this year is due to that ransomware that has not been priced effectively.
So we've gotten lots more claims. Do we have? So Jeremiah Grossman, I had him on a couple episodes back, and we were basically talking about folks. If you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to it, watch it, listen to it again. And the premise that we came up with is essentially the cyber insurance industry is going to drive security. Like, it is going to drive what happens in security over the next 10 years. Because if you can, insurance is going to become a necessary thing to have. You're going to have it. And in order to get an affordable rate, you're going to have to be, your carrier is going to dictate, just like your carrier today probably dictates who your data breach lawyer is and what firm you can use for forensics and incident response. They're going to tell you, these are the 17 things you must do to X level of excellence. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to afford me, or I won't pay. Right. And so, do you see that happening?
Yes. We are actually starting to see that now, to where some carriers are saying, we are not going, and again, I'm working in the larger market space, larger revenue market space, to where we're seeing, if you don't, and I'll go over these particular things, if you don't have these particular things in place, I'm not going to afford you coverage.
Okay. So
now what are
let's talk about that. Let's talk about what are those things. Now I'm interested. So I feel like we were our the mentality that Jeremiah brought to this, and I agreed with, got validated just now by somebody who clearly knows. Okay, good. We're not insane. So tell me what the things are.
Sure. And this is, again, for a larger revenue organization. As you go down to where you have 3 AT people, this gets a lot more difficult. However, you're also not as targeted either as these larger organizations are. It's much more gratuitous random, right? So some of these are an aspect of COVID to where we had everybody working
Okay.
from home. So one of the first things I'll mention is make sure you have
Multi-factor
MFA.
authentication. Okay.
Exactly. Make sure you have RDP, remote desktop protocol. Make sure you have that controlled. And those two things are a direct result, mostly from RDP, definitely from COVID. Because hey, what's the easiest thing you can do to allow your workers to work from home? Hey, you turn on RDP and you allow it open to the internet to everybody, and then
lovely.
Exactly. Other things underwriters are asking about: make sure you have a limited number of admin accounts. These are way easier said than done. I know. I realize that, but those are, for larger organizations. If you don't have those, I'm probably not going to write you. That gets your foot in the door. Now somebody else might, and that's fine. And that's risk tolerance varies from insurance carrier to insurance carrier.
But here's an important reason for all this, Shawn.
And I got some more, Shawn.
Yeah, I know. Y'all are learning from real life experience based on what the losses are coming from. This isn't some sales pitch at a security conference saying, "Oh, these are the big risks." Y'all are seeing what's causing the
That's the interesting part for me.
And that's why this is so reliable.
That's the interesting part, because there's a cause and effect now. You're doing direct cause and effect. We had 50 ransomware attacks. All of them were the result of X. I'm not underwriting companies that don't do X. The end.
Right.
All right, give me the rest.
So some more. All right, so some more things. EDR, endpoint detection and response. Ransomware. If I hear you have some sort of EDR that is protecting your users from themselves, which been there, done that, right? Great. Let's have that in place. I think that is one of the larger mitigating controls for ransomware is that EDR protection. Something else that preventive control. Security awareness program, phishing education. Instead of phishing training, not security awareness training, it's security awareness education, which then leads me to talk about a culture, because we want to have a culture of security. We want to have that tone from the top. When I hear good tone from the top, I love my security people, I think, okay, they're going to give them resources, they're going to give them money, they're going to give them people, and the process should follow if they have the right people. Next, from Target and some of those things from way back when, vendor management program. A lot of cyber coverages will include outsourced vendor issues. So if you have a vendor go down, we call it contingent business interruption, and that may what you see in your policy. But that business interruption is what's driving it. You may have a policy that doesn't even mention ransomware. And before this, I took a couple policies and I did a search for ransomware. Doesn't even exist. They'll call it cyber extortion. They'll call it contingent business interruption. They'll call it business interruption. So you have to look at those terms, but I'm digressing a little here. But the vendor management, that covering those outsourced vendors, that's scary for cyber insurers, because I have no idea what your vendors, what your security posture is like. But I do know that if you're going to your vendors and you're asking for SOC 1s and SOC 2s and the SSA 18s and all those kind of things, and you got your finger on your vendors, then you have redundancy, then okay, you're probably a little better right than those who don't. Some other factors: backups, and restores. I want to see those backups tested. If you have to have backups, period. If you don't have backups, we're done. I want to hear that you have tested your restores and that they work, because we've had so many. Now, for larger organizations, you can get into immutable immutable backups to where they're off in the cloud and they're air gapped and those kind of things. That really warms my heart, and I really like those, obviously, because then ransomware can't get at those backups, which once that happens, it's not a good day. So I think those are the major things where, at this point with our, and I keep doing this with our premium, right? With our prices going up so dramatically, if you're a larger organization, that kind of gets you in the door. unfortunately. And you'll probably see some premium drops for that, but at this point in time, right now in June, maybe not a lot until these things kind of calm down. What we have here is insurance kind of
Yeah.
runs in cycles. And what we have is we're going towards the top of what they call a hard market, and you can use that language with your broker. And that's where the prices go up, and the insurers like mine, they exit the market.
Huh.
They also like mine, they constrict capacity, so
Interesting.
that in coverages. So like instead of writing, and we write very large limits. Instead of writing 10 million in limits, I'm only going to do 5 this year. Those
Okay.
kind of things. So it's all about a supply and demand thing. The supply is going down because of the claims.
Fair enough.
The demand,
It's going up.
unfortunately, is going up, right? And so when supply goes down and demand goes up.
All right, let me ask the question I've been dying to ask. Ransoms. Do you help pay ransoms? Because there's been a lot of talk about this, about making it illegal, because it encourages more. I mean, let's face it, you're paying terrorists and extortionists, right, to empower them.
Yeah.
But in some cases, if you can't, you're done. Like, that's it. Everybody go home. We're closed. What's the I don't want necessarily yours or companies. I know you want to. What's your take on it personally, and what do you think the industry is going to do?
So let's start with the industry. So the industry currently, they're trying to get a handle on this. And as I said, you'll see it in your policy. You'll see it probably more as cyber extortion than you will at ransomware. And they'll actually, when you say ransomware, that's what I'm sorry, but that's what we call a peril. And there are coverages to help you deal with that peril. And so you'll see cyber extortion, you'll see business interruption, and you'll see crisis management. Now there's about 5 others that are usually in a cyber policy, but those are the 3 that usually get triggered, as we say, for ransomware. From the standpoint of cyber extortion, that's the actual ransom piece. Okay, more than likely you're going to get the business interruption, and you're going to get the crisis management, probably no matter what. It's the cyber extortion that we're talking about here. There is an insurer, there's a French insurer that said we are no longer going to cover ransoms in France, and they were attacked. They were attacked by, of course, the ransomware bad guys. Yes, we have seen other carriers who were also attacked because they wrote cyber policies. Why? Because if I'm a bad guy and I know who you're covering and how much insurance they have, I'm going to go after them and say, hey, you know what? I want 20 million from you. Yes, because I see you have 20 million in coverage.
That's evil.
Which goes back. Here's another helpful tip. If you have a cyber policy, don't store it out on the internet everywhere on your homepage or that kind of thing. Kind of keep it hidden and into yourself and close to the vest, because if an attacker gets a hold of that, that's not a good day. Let's talk about should we cover this? You can, and I'll give you again a general kind of feeling, and then my personal feeling. From generally, this is very similar. It's almost identical to what they call K&R, which is kidnap and ransom. And this is, way back in the 70s, back when the U.S. said we are no longer going to pay ransom or deal with terrorists.
As a policy,
back in the late 70s and that kind of thing. Right, exactly. I think we have seen some government oversight as far as OFAC. OFAC has said, not says you can't pay ransom, but we're going to reiterate that it is illegal to send payments, and Shawn, you can please jump in and help me. It is illegal to send payments to entities that are on the OFAC list. And I think what came out last October, was just a reiteration of that. There wasn't, I don't think, any extra guidance or anything like that. So that makes insurers it makes me kind of antsy about paying when every time we pay a claim, we have to check the OFAC list to make sure that it's appropriate.
Because they said not just the company, but those who are helping facilitate the payment to the prohibited entity.
Shawn,
that's when the insurance carriers were like, hold on, time out.
From my personal perspective, what I have seen since 2014, data breaches, monetization. How much is this credit card worth?
Yeah.
How much is this medical record
Yep.
worth? Now we get into monetization of ransomware. Crypto is such a unique tool, and the the amount of skill needed to wield that tool now is very small. So you can have lots of people, lots of, let's call them script kiddies, right, from back in the day. You can have script kiddies doing this, and so it's very pervasive. And I think the only reason they do it is monetization. We don't see a lot of hacktivism
Okay.
with ransomware. And so if you take away that monetization, I personally think a lot of this would not completely go away, but it would sure help alleviate it. As far as insurers covering that, I think if insurers, and this is my personal opinion, if insurers did not cover ransomware, I think it would solve some of these issues.
It would also undoubtedly put a lot of companies out of business, unfortunately. So,
No,
I mean,
absolutely.
this is the problem. And I saw the guidance a couple of weeks ago. They came out and said, we're thinking about, making it illegal, but we're going to give it a year. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I could possibly think of doing, because ransomware gangs are going to go, all right, we got 12 months. Let's get it going. It's like everybody's going to get absolutely rushed to get. That's silly. If you're going to do that, make it illegal starting right now. That's it. But
right.
I don't know.
I think what we have been seeing lately with insurers is they will do things called sublimits, and they will do things called co-insurance, and I'll explain both of those. So a sublimit, if you have $1 million in coverage, total coverage, right? But your insurer says, the real scary stuff, in order to keep your premiums low for you, we are going to apply a sublimit to the real scary stuff, and that sublimit is, say, $50,000. So, and let's say we're applying that to ransomware. So if you have a $50,000 sublimit on ransomware and you have a cyber extortion, and you have a cyber extortion claim for the ransom, then they're only going to pay $50,000. Okay. If the ransom, they want $7 million, well, you got 50,000 of that covered.
All right.
However, you look on the flip side of that, if the people that are doing the extorting know these companies can't pay, now we're back into a situation back into, let's say, about 2016, 2017, 2018, where we had personal ransomware.
Yeah.
And you probably remember that, where it was kind of ceilinged at about $900, because I'm not going to pay more than $900 to get, sad I lost my pictures, but I'm not going to pay more than $900 to get my pictures back. And so then I think we can talk about those kind of scenarios and that kind of thing. If you have somebody with unfortunately with a laptop and their business is on it, they may just go out of business rather than pay they can't pay $7 million.
They don't have it, right?
So they may just go out of business. Right, exactly.
Wow. Well, that's a great place to end this. Good. I'm going to get you back on the show because I want a little bit of time to pass, and I want us to, folks, if you're listening, I want you to think about the same thing I'm thinking about, because it's a problem. It's the I don't think the enterprise is the place of the big pain. I think it's down market, because as you go down market, I see you guys agreeing with me. As you go down market, whether it's the ability to defend yourself, the ability to sustain budget, the ability to hire and retain, the ability to operationalize and partner effectively, the ability to go look at your third parties, the ability to understand and buy cyber insurance and do all the things necessary. I feel like it's a 1 over X curve, right? Initially that step between Fortune 250 and Fortune 500 is a massive drop in capability. After that, it just sort of kind of levels off. Eventually, you just get asymptotically closer to 0 and 0, and you're just like, this is just not going to happen, no matter how small you are. And I think that is to me the biggest threat, because there's so many mid-sized companies that are, the gas line company wasn't a giant enterprise, right? The meat company, processing company wasn't a giant enterprise. I don't think so. Were they, Sean? Guys? They weren't part of the Fortune 1000. I don't know. Maybe not.
I
But they didn't
don't
see.
know.
They didn't read like right.
did a lot of
They didn't read like a massive company, right? They didn't read like we've got a $200 million security budget, and so then what, right? Your local utility company, the attorney's offices, the doctor's offices. These are not places that are affording tens of millions of dollars in cyber protection for themselves, much less understanding what the heck they're doing. But whether it's health and safety, whether it's national security, whether it's operational or life continuity, whatever, they still matter quite a bit. And this is kind of the I don't know. This is the part that continues to make me sad about the way this industry operates and things that are related to cyber operate is at scale at the very large end. You've got a prayer. As soon as you step out of that ring of the very, very, very big kids, you are in a world of pain, and you can just sort of go, I don't know what I'm going to
do. For the longest time, we were battling the issue of it won't happen to me. Think back 2014, 2015, 2016. They're only going after the big guys. It's not going to happen to me. I think we've moved the scale a little bit to where we're at a point now where folks do realize it can happen to them. But security is incredibly complex at one end of the continuum. But decent security can really be simplified in a lot of ways at the other end of the spectrum. It doesn't have to. It's not 70% security, but if we're taking somebody from 0 to 40, hey, we're improving a lot. The problem is those companies that need that, they're at a point where they realize they need something, but it's been made so complex and so out of reach for them that they don't know where to start, and they don't know even some of the most simple steps to do to get moving in that direction.
That's a good point, Sean. Is I think what that translates to me is that low hanging fruit. It's fairly I wouldn't say easy, but it's easier to address than the high hanging fruit. And there's such a curve up, as you mentioned in the asymptotic. There's such a curve up in resources, in price, to get at those much higher priced security tools to reach that high hanging fruit.
Yeah, and guys, we've all talked about this, and this is sort of common in our industry as far as knowledge goes. But the investment, the first real investment you make in your security is the one that makes the biggest impact, because everything after a certain point becomes just incrementally tinier. But it's knowing where to put that first bit of investment, how much to put. And I think, John, people like yourself and from the attorney side and from the underwriter side are going to drive this industry. And I'm really interested to see how it goes, because quite frankly, the approach we've had so far doesn't work. Okay. Leaving it up to ourselves to govern ourselves and police ourselves to do better doesn't work. Yeah. So if it's insurance that makes us drive slower and not blow stop signs,
seatbelts,
right?
Seatbelts.
If that's what makes us do it, okay, fine, I'm in. But then I got to say, okay, but we have to be data driven, and data driven only looks backwards and does not look forward. That's the next challenge for me when I look at it and go, all right, we know how we've been getting hacked up until now, but what's the next thing? Like, what's the next thing that we need to do as a control? If we get everybody to this level and a ransomware starts disappearing, what's the next control that's going to bring on the next big tsunami that we're going to have? So anyway, food for thought, guys. Thanks for being on the show. It's been fun.
Great show.
Yes, thank you.
All right, John and Sean, thanks for joining us, guys. We will be back for another show another time, and we will catch you another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. We hope you enjoy the content. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
As we fade out on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole episode, we'd like to encourage you to chat with our hosts and guests using the Twitter hashtag #DtSR. Please check out the show notes, catch up on any episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. Our website is whiterabbit.net, WH1T3RABBIT.net. So on behalf of Rafal, James, for now it's goodbye. We'll see you soon on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.